Hi, my name is Michael Hampton. Welcome to the Head Drawing and Construction course. Today we're going to be talking about a step-by-step approach that will take you through how to understand the proportions of the face, breakdown of the features and planes of the features, and that takes us to adding some light and shadow. So first step, basic sphere, my tilt, my jaw. I'm thinking about my chin and the orientation of the rotation of the head. Here's the gesturing of that neck, pinch and stretch, brow line, center, proportions, halves and thirds, just a quick reminder. The hairline is here. My 4 points now for the sides. There's my quarters. So now we could put the ear in this quarter. And then from that I get my jaw to my chin. Here's my sockets. And then let's relate that to the forehead. Here, I'm going to lose some of this. I don't need a lot of that setup, so we could just start to think of how that cheek might go behind. So create that overlap of the cheek behind the brow. Keystone is next. Socket line here. Where's the nose? Here's the proportion line. Create your simple box. That can give me the corner of the eye. You can see how this sometimes is misleading because that would be that rhythm, but I'm really seeing more of the curve of the cheek down here. So that would be the plus and the minus of that rhythm. Denture sphere. Let's think about that large form working in the face. If you're interested in adding hair, I just think of it as a hat. You know, it's just I just use wrapping lines to bring a shape and kind of connect it around the head. So I would address it like, like Barbie hair, like one plastic mold that's kind of rested on top of the head. Mostly just so I could think of the design and the attachment. So that would be our construction stage. That's most of the important things that we looked at there. And now we'll start to add and play around with some of the features. If you want, you could start by sometimes just putting the pupil and iris first, and then put the structure of the lid on top. What's interesting about his brow? Maybe there's a bit more of a surface here. So that's the development of that brow ridge. But the inside of the socket still does feel like it's more recessed. For the lower lid, we could see a little bit better the structure of that box. We could even start to make, small observations about the structure of the fat underneath the eye, and then how we would transition from that. So from a hard form to a softer form, always kept as simple form. So a ball, a stretched cylinder, a curved box. And if we jump across to the other side, what do I start to notice? Oh, I probably should really narrow out that keystone a bit. On this side, I could see that same structure to the eye. The attachment has that box. It hits the ball of the eye, comes up, goes across. I can see a little bit of the fat back here. I guess that would be the pinch of that kind of softer form and then over that harder form there. So we've created my eye. Then there's the box coming forward of the lid and then back down. Continuing here, that hard surface, and then the way that it gets integrated with the soft underneath. That's another good asymmetry to keep aware of, is just the body and then the face especially are these jumps between hard and soft. And what would that be as a perspective? That comes down and then it starts to fold out this way. So if we linger around the cheek a little bit more, here's a lot of what I was sharing in terms of the bone being more present now, and the present turn on the cashew shape or structure of the cheekbone coming around. So you can see at this stage I like to spend time around the feature, develop the feature, move down, and kind of jump around, look at the parts of the face, try to develop an awareness of the context. Let's do the nose now. So I'm going to pinch the box up here because that nasal saddle looks to be really narrow and thin. Center line of the nose. You don't have to try to draw it as if it's profile, although it's not a horrible idea. So how would we think of this? Well, I'm probably going to broaden this. That's closer to the box I laid in. But then I think it gets even wider. But maybe now you just take the planes of your box and start to make them larger or more slender. I think we'd lose this in shadow, but that's dropping back. You can see pretty well on this guy's face that have that change, come back out and forward and then down again. So this could be the bell. Each little form is an opportunity for me to pause, think about one thing at a time in the structure, and then try to solve or understand a bit more about the perspective. So remember, for the lips, we can start by bringing down the philtrum shape. I'm doing that because I already comfortable with the way that the proportion line of my lips echoes a roundness, so it feels appropriate to that denture sphere. But if you don't have that, you'd check for that first. So it's still the M and the W, but the lips here are really thin. So that's our process for that. You get the M and the W wrapped across that center line, but you're doing it in a way on these that tries to capture that person's M, that person's lip. And then the W at the bottom would be taking this ellipse that describes the curvature of the mouth and then echoing it with the beginning of the center for your W on the bottom. And then what are we left with below? We're left with these 3 planes. 3 planes across, one that matches with the different turns and contours of the lip, but it's just been smashed down to match more the shapes that we're seeing here. And then for the chin, really pretty broad. I could still bring up mine a little bit though, so maybe we'll just adjust, lift this some. This would be maybe we'd have this as that buccal fat, so think of that surrounding the face. Now I've worked through a simple construction development, and then I've on top put a more simple or breakdown of the features and planes of the features, and that takes us to where we'd be ready to start adding some light and shadow. So what I'll be thinking about to kind of make the bridge or bridge the linear into the tonal will be when I see the fall of light and shadow on a specific surface or part of the head, I'll ask myself, is that area more of a box, a cylinder, or a sphere? So the 4 edges that I'll be using as I start to work through this will be soft. So I think of a soft edge for spheres, a firm edge for cylinders, and a hard edge for boxes. When I think about lighting, the basic things that I'm going to think about here for lighting a sphere, or cylinder, or box would be that there's a form shadow. That would be the darkest part of the shadow that we currently see on the sphere. That's caused by light hitting the sphere from a specific angle. In terms of thinking about light, it's sometimes good to ask more questions like, 1, what type of light? Is it sun? Is it candle? Is it, something totally different? And then what's the direction? Is it coming from the top, the bottom? This is a way you could maybe build in a bit more story. In some concept art or film, you can reduce that down to about 5 different value compositions. So if we start to associate light and its position with one of 5 value compositions, whether it's high key, low key, high contrast, mid-range, in terms of your value scale and thinking of light and its placement, you can get a lot of gesture, a lot of storytelling from those simple steps. When I'm thinking more about the face, what I'm really looking for would be this area of the core shadow. This would be the part of the shadow that's describing the form and its turn. And then I would look at that maybe in contrast to the areas that would be more cast shadows. What I'm really looking for or focusing on for this video would be, where is the core shadow? And then what is the quality of halftone and edge that comes off of that, right? So when I think of lighting, I don't think of trying to manufacture a copy of what's in front of me. I think about timing. So we're timing the viewer's eye as it tracks across the surface. So for me, this reads as a sphere or as a ball, because through the use of edge, I'm gradually taking your eye and pulling it across the surface of that form. What I've done in my drawings is I try to make those plane changes really clear in an aggressive way so that I'm able to make sense of them and think them out and understand the form. When I get to this stage, I don't want that anymore, right? I'd like to be moving the eye across those in a way that's more consistent with the natural look. So the sphere, I always design with soft edges so that it moves the eye slowly across. The firm edges of the cylinder track the eye across a quicker volume, so that moves a little bit more fast. The hard edges of the box, right, there's an exact, precise and fast or abrupt movement between those planes. So no edges. That's what I'm looking to do. So I understand the parts of the face now. A part's a ball. That's how we started the head. The nose is a box. The eye is a ball. I can set up all of my form and cast shadow to map based on those differences. And so the goal would be to just separate out to begin, where is the light-dark division? And then if you can, the lighting condition gives you that read for that core shadow. You could just start to work there and move your way down. Let's leave the hair out for the moment and just take a look at this forehead. What plane or what kind of surface would your forehead be? Cylinder. You could really decide your own or kind of come up with your own. But my first line is going to be something that tries to, 1, track where that difference is. So I'm thinking in this area. where is that light shadow difference for the forehead? Where does it turn? And then the other thing that I'm making sure to do is that all of my core shadows, or the areas that are prominent separations of light from shadow, they're also still wrapping lines. They're lines that describe form. They won't be, in other words, sharp. So I'm going to do my core shadow here. Now it bumps out. And then I can see this starts to become more of a cylindrical form. So for the first line, that C curve that travels across the forehead, maybe I'll just soften this out. So now this would be edge, but that'd be that halftone soft edge that I want to read more consistently with the sphere. So you can see that I'm using the planes that are underneath to get an idea or an impression of that movement, but the edge eventually replaces the line. So no lines in nature, just edges. Now if I move down, so we start to look a little bit more at the cylinder, that's not nearly, right? So this wouldn't be as fast. So maybe I change the timing. The gradation here gives me more of that slow turn. So you could imagine that kind of moving away. This might be more abrupt. And now if I'm onto the socket, we know that the socket is a box. And there could be some complicating things here. Maybe there's muscle or skin around the socket that might soften it a bit. But I would say let's just keep this sharper for the moment just to get that sense of turn. So think about the surface again. What kind of surface have you made? That's consistent with that sharp break. This edge is a hard edge, looks different than the soft edge above. Maybe this plane change of the keystone is more of a cylindrical form, right? It doesn't look like a sphere, it's not that smooth. It doesn't look totally like a box. It looks like it has kind of that gradual roll around it. So I'm always just mapping the shape. So what happens when this turns, now this blocks, and that creates a little cast shadow. So I can see that cast shadow has kind of a sharp knife point. It picks up and over that ligament or that structure of the eye, which is interesting. Now you can see how that might benefit you in terms of your understanding of the design of light and shadow, that all of these little forms that we spent time working up end up informing a shape design or a graphic design and implication for the figure. And then that comes, let's say, maybe up. Maybe it rolls up over that tarsus plate. And then I get a bit of a soft turn, so that'd be the cast shadow across, and then I get a form shadow for the lid. It's always just sphere, cylinder, box. It's never, I'm lighting an eye. I think the moment we start thinking about lighting an eye, this is the moment we kind of lose the whole. It makes much more sense to light the bigger forms first. So what if we did the design of the whole of the eye as a form shadow, instead of trying to, what I think a lot of people might do, myself included, my less focused moments, try to render the pupil and iris and then somehow crowbar the lighting around it into those smaller areas. I think a good rule is try to always light the big ideas first, whether it's just the big graphic separation and edges or the forms themselves. So that would jump out. Maybe we're now onto the tarsus plate or the lower lid. Maybe that gives a little cast shadow over here onto some of that eye fat. And we get it looks like a little cast or something on the top of that cheek. So the design of this shape is informed by the structure underneath. And then now look at, if we think of this cheekbone as a cylinder, it could be a cylinder or a box. It's however you really want to interpret it. I separate light from shadow, and then I just give a bit of a gradation to that edge. This comes in, so this is the turn of that cheek. And then notice how this edge, I'm onto the malar fat pad, this is more gradual. I can see more of a gradation, in other words. So that's a slower timing, and I could explain that slower timing by saying that's a softer form. You could do the same thing for the nose, since we're kind of in that area. Maybe nose is like a cylinder there. So we'll try to get rid of that line and instead kind of soften out that edge. Let's move that down into the larger form of the nose here. And what I could start to see is maybe more of a ball. That's where if I really focus, I can see that core shadow, that dark separation of light and shadow. Here would be the plane change. Notice how that light breaks also very consistently with where we turned that box, that top to the bottom plane, and then up. So even those early rudimentary setup for the kind of the robotic head is still super informative to the decisions that I'm making now. But really, it's not even a bad idea just to sometimes spend time lighting those really simple preliminary studies, instead of something with all the features built up. I feel like there might be a little cast shadow here. This would be a firm edge or a cylindrical edge on the turn of that And the back gets a little softer. That bell or that fat pad for the back of the nose might be a little rounder. And then I start to track that into the bottom of the nose. And then I create, or I see that there's a cast shadow. So cast shadow is going to get that really abrupt, dark separation. So no edge, right? Some consistent with how I'd maybe use or draw a box. So here, I'm going to walk my cast shadow across and around these different surfaces. So it goes up, kind of jumps into that philtrum shape. And as long as I'm tracing or tracking form, it doesn't matter in this case that it would be a harder shape or edge. Maybe I see a little bit over here. So that's kind of up behind that nostril, kind of tracks some of that plane change in the malar fat. And so you give that a little softer edge, because that malar fat now would be the slow turn of that form in and around. We hook back up with the shape of the nostril on that side. The cast shadow ends in a way where the light just starts to kind of fall and become less associated with the harder lines of that cast area or shadow. Okay, so let's keep our mapping going over here. So we left off with the malar fat, and that kind of comes into where we discussed the buccal fat. We discussed that as being round, right? So I'm going to time that and soften it. But hopefully you can get a sense of how, if you found any of the prior head constructions to look a little stark or quirky, that you can really see that it hopefully starts to kind of become a little bit more softened, a little bit more quote unquote realistic, or have a more of a feeling of naturalism. And then while we're kind of tracing this outside shadow line down, let's also hit the chin, which I'm seeing as an egg. So an egg, we'd be getting a core shadow with a nice gradation that takes the viewer's eye from the area of light, and without any kind of abrupt change or shift, just walks them into that core shadow and then shadow. And then I see that coming over here. Look at how it core shadow blends with that jowl fat that's dropped. Right? So that's that form that we discussed as a great way to kind of demarcate a more advanced stage. That pulls back up, but a different kind of shadow experience here, the turn around that jaw. That feels more like a cylinder to me, so more abrupt. On this side, I'm getting a little bit of that would mostly just be kind of halftone, but this face is turning away here. And then the last kind of big area that I would see or set up for light and shadow would be just the other side of the socket here. So I'm going to come back in and change every line to an edge. So once I get to this point, the next thing that I would do is I'm thinking about the value composition of my scene or of my piece. So I have a value 1, that's the page. I have a value 10 based on the intensity of the lighting. That's kind of what I staged my core shadow at. So I'm going to fill it in to begin at a value 5. So I would just take from this point and start to paint in an idea of the face or the shadow as a consistent value all the way down. And if I did a good job mapping my edges, it should start to take on a subtle feeling of form or of realism. Right? The goal at this point wouldn't be to come in and start to paint everything out yet. It's just to key. Really, I'm trying to key the large values in relationship to the form of the face in that area of lighting and where it hits it. So we have this. Notice also that I'm going to lose this edge. So it's important to me that we don't walk around with big outlines around our head. So that would be, something that could be deceiving from the study that we just made. Everything has to be a line and have a reason. Well, we don't have this. We see edges. So I like to lose a lot of those edges, right, in terms of painting these pieces out. So when you're making these, don't feel like you have to be restricted to the outline. That would be that idea of the lost edge or the compositional edge. Maybe you blow out that side of the form because it's starting to compete too much with where you want the focal point to be. Usually with portraits, I'll create more detail or more visual interest by finishing one eye, and then from there, the rest of the composition or the rest of the piece can be a little bit more soft. I don't want to stage the attention to be in one area. So here would be the filled shape of the cast shadow area off the nose. Once we have our form there, then we could start to drop in our shadow around the bottom of the neck and face. This is a lighter or a weaker cast shadow, but we could still put one down here. Hugs that jowl fat, and then maybe comes across the neck, then maybe onto the scarf or the shirt. The last thing we want to do here, though, is maybe let's map out these lips. I don't want to leave those just too loose in terms of the denture sphere itself. So I get that form shadow on the top lip, and then this looks like it's cast. So that would be a cast shadow that's coming from the upper lip, and then maybe living on the lower lip. So now all those planes that I put in there come back and aid me. Just give me an idea of how one would be impacting the other, and it curves in and then back out again. This area is, I think that's a cylinder. So this kind of rolls up a bit. And then by the time we get out here, that looks a little bit more sphere-like. So maybe on this, he's raising that corner of his mouth up. And then all of this here kind of has a cool cast shadow look. So that comes down, up, and then we see here there's a form shadow for the lip. So even the forms, as they get smaller and smaller, you won't be confused because you still know how to read each one. This is a box, this is a cylinder, despite the fact that they're intimidating. And then this lower lip, maybe that makes a cast shadow, and that comes down and then just sits or glances, maybe even comes out and forward onto the top of that chin there. Then all of this comes back and up, and then meets up with that initial shape here, but I probably loose that edge a bit, and then we'll just fill it in. And by the time you get done, you're going to start to find that a lot of those lines and points and planes that you worked hard to develop are going to start to get ghosted, or you'll lose. They won't become as prominent, especially if you kept a lighter touch through most of the drawing, and that you'll just be left with good scaffolding to help with your decision making around tone. This course will help with any number of things. It could be invention, building more of a backbone and a scaffolding to the way that you think about your light and shadow. You're going to be learning a step-by-step approach that will take you through how to understand the proportions of the face and then address the features as sculptures that will be set on top of those primary forms. Check it out. It's at proko.com/Hampton. I'll see you there.